Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. We're going to get started now. We'd like to thank you for making time to join us this morning for today's webinar, The New Reality of Fundraising, hosted by Capital CFO. Today, we will discuss how we can rethink our fundraising strategy, preserve funding, and engage and appreciate donors. My name is Katie Stair, and I'm joining you today along with the team from Capital CFO, Sabrina Hauser, owner, and Liz Chipman, director. At Capital CFO, we work in your business so you can work on your business by providing bookkeeping and outsourced CFO services, as well as financial planning and recruitment supports. In addition, Capital CFO offers services to help nonprofits thrive, including grant research and writing, strategic planning and transition planning, interim executive director, creating a powerful board that fundraises, workshops, outreach and communication strategy, and more. Before we get started today, I'd like to cover just a couple housekeeping basics. First off, if you're joining by phone, please feel free to email any questions that you have to Liz, and you can reach Liz at capitalcfollc.com. If you have any technical issues or difficulties, you can reach out to our team using the chat box. And please also use the chat box to submit your questions or comments at any time during the presentation, and we'll be pausing a few times to address questions. This session is being recorded and will be provided along with other resources to all attendees. For today's agenda, we're going to frame the impact of COVID-19 on the social sector, talk about ways we can fundraise within the current landscape, discuss how we can engage and appreciate our donors during this time, share some recommendations and helpful tools, and finally, leave you with a few resources to help you shift your fundraising strategy. So let's get started. Organizations are changing, it's no doubt. A recent study by La Piana Consulting surveyed over 750 social sector contacts nationwide, and the results are staggering. From March to April, they found that 91% of organizations have been forced to curtail services or adapt how to provide them. 80% have moved some or all programs to an online or other digital delivery method. 90% experienced revenue loss. And finally, fundraising is down 30 to 40% since the beginning of the crisis. Funders are shifting their focus to support COVID-19 needs. While these needs are important, it does leave many organizations scrambling to find a way to continue to support themselves. And the reality of social distancing is that we don't know how long we're going to be doing this, how limited we will be with social gathering, and thus when we will be able to return to the typical fundraising event world we've known for so long. And we're not just talking about this summer's events. We could really be looking at 1 to 2 years down the road or more. This quote from the La Piana study frames one person's very valid concern. I'm very concerned that the philanthropic community is pivoting toward only funding COVID-19 related organizations. And I am concerned about social service groups that aren't directly working on this and therefore not eligible for the grants and resources. But for those of us who rely on fundraising to support mission-driven work, this is not the time to give up. This is the time to be flexible and creative. And one of the first ways we can be flexible is to consider our fundraising strategy and planned or annual events and pivot our thinking. We're seeing it all throughout our region and across the country already this spring. Organizations aren't just automatically canceling events. Instead, they're reimagining them within the context of social distancing. So how can you do that with your planned events? It's time for you to take a close look at your event and determine if you can reimagine it in a new format. Take from the examples of others. Rather than hosting a live running event, for example, switch it to a virtual run. Runners do their own race on the same day. They still contribute to participate and they post about their participation online. In some cases, this may actually result in more publicity for your event and your cause rather than the traditional race. Transition a live concert or arts performance to allow attendees to watch from the comfort of their own home. You can use Zoom, Facebook Live, or YouTube to host a virtual concert or arts performance. It's also fairly simple if you have an in-person auction planned to shift to an online auction. And then, of course, there's the non-event event, where you sell tickets and seek support for your organization, but instead of attending an in-person event, supporters know they are donating 100% of their funds to the cause rather than covering the expense of the event. And we're seeing here, I featured an example, the Rensselaer County Chamber has shifted their in-person dinner and business expo to a virtual celebration to do just that. In some cases, you may have to shift your event to a new format altogether. For example, if you had a dinner event planned, you certainly can't necessarily do that anymore, but you may consider doing a socially distant dinner or wine tasting where you deliver a meal or a bottle of wine to people who would have attended your dinner, and then host an online gathering to simulate the togetherness and mission building atmosphere you would have had in person. We're also seeing a lot of groups promoting their mission and raising a few dollars by hosting digital happy hours, online trivia nights, and even scavenger hunts to help get people outside and moving. Then there's the option to go for the direct ask using online platforms rather than an event-based model. A monthly giving drive could be implemented in which you challenge donors to give a certain amount per month for a year, or a matched giving drive where a donor commits a dollar amount to be gifted if and only if the organization is able to raise the same amount from other sources. You can also consider a peer ask where you use your networks of board, staff, and volunteers to make a giving request of their friends and personal networks. And we have a great example of this we're going to share in just a few minutes. You might also consider a raffle where you raffle off the option to win a portion of the proceeds or a coveted item. Some organizations are also shifting from asking for dollars specifically and instead doing a supply donation drive, so that you might be asking for certain supplies. For example, if you're a food pantry, you might ask for food supplies or toiletry supplies rather than just dollars and cents. And finally, you might partner with a business who has a philanthropic mission. Here we've highlighted Rewire Energy, who donates a certain amount of the proceeds from every time someone signs up, they donate a dollar amount to a partner nonprofit organization. Finally, you can use various platforms for these types of opportunities, including Facebook fundraising has a great feature. Crowdfunding sites like Fundly, CauseVox, Global Giving, Classy.org, and more are designed specifically to help nonprofits fundraise. And then if you have one, the donate section on your website. And I'd like to mention, if you look in the chat box, Sabrina has shared some information, some contact information so that you can learn more about the opportunity that Rewire Energy offers. But there are additional businesses that have a similar model as well. Finally, when you're fundraising in the time of COVID-19, there are a few things you might want to remember. The first being that turning on a dime might not be realistic for every fundraiser. And we certainly encourage you to be creative and be as flexible as you can, but you also need to be realistic. Budgeting is very important, and looking at your budget and reframing it based on the shift that you're making. Some costs may be lower, and I think the preconceived notion is that if you go virtual, it will be less expensive, but you may have some increased costs, especially as you consider the staff time that you're going to put into that shift. You'll want to invest in a platform for accepting donations or purchasing tickets. We've mentioned a few options for accepting donations, purchasing tickets. Eventbrite is a great tool. And with many of them, you can also pass on the fee to the donor as well, so that all of the proceeds go directly to the nonprofit. With any virtual format, we encourage you to do a test run, do 2 or 3, really learn about the tool that you're using so that you don't have any glitches. And then finally, provide clear instruction to your supporters so they know how to participate, they know how to give, what their giving is going for, and what to expect. At this time, I'm going to ask Sabrina to pop in with us and share a model for a peer ask that is simple and effective and can help bring in the dollars.
Thanks so much, Katie, and good morning, everybody. I do want, before we get started on the example, I do want to just say 2 quick things about this. First, for any of the information that we are sharing, if there is a hesitation of cost, again, that is a great way to turn to your donors in times of COVID to say this is how we're pivoting, and don't be afraid to ask for them to be a sponsor of one of those platforms that you might need. Because again, that is a great way to get their name out there and then promote them while still getting the cost of whatever you might need to get up and running taken care of. Secondly, I know that we mentioned Rewire Energy, but a lot of donors are looking for collaboration, and this is a great win-to-win because a lot of us, you know, as fundraisers and working on our own mission, what a great way to partner with somebody that is environmentally conscious, which is something that also people are thinking about right now, and a way to promote each other. So I did leave Lee's information. Okay, now to get back to the peer-to-peer ask. This was something that I actually started when I was the CEO of a local agency here in the Capital region. And I started it pre-COVID. So I want to say we started this probably 5 or 6 years ago. But now it's making just so much more sense. And people really want to get engaged and involved. So here's what we did. We were an agency that took in a lot of volunteers. We were very volunteer driven, and we saw hundreds of volunteers a year, and every volunteer was actually paired with a client that we were serving. So what we started several years ago is we asked our volunteers to ask 25 of their friends for $25. And then we gave them this grid that you'll see here up on, and we will share all of these resources with you. But we allowed them to figure out how to raise that money in 2 short weeks. Now, this doesn't take 2 short weeks. It actually takes much less. But if people wanted to do one a day, they could. What's phenomenal about this is that people posted on their social media sites, and they used all of their platforms available, and it was such a light, easy lift that people were able to do it. They were able to do it really quickly. And this is able to be leveled depending on your constituent. So we also worked with a lot of college students, and we shifted this and asked them to raise, to ask 25 of their friends for $10. We launched it with our board, and we asked them to find 25 people that would give them $100. We did an executive challenge where we met with CEOs of different corporations, and we asked them to ask 10 of their friends for $1,000. So you could see how this can kind of level itself up. And what's great about it is you can use it kind of across the board depending on the population that you're using with. It allows them to tell your story and why your mission is important to them as a volunteer and as a giver. And then they share parts of the mission that's important to them. And it's just this personalized story, and it opens it up to their network as opposed to you going back and asking the same people for the same thing over and over again. So like we said, we'll share this resource with you, but we certainly loved it. We've had so much success with it. And now in times of virtual events, this is a non-event event. It cost our agency $0 to put this on, other than the staff time to go out and help. The other thing that's great about it is with our college students and anybody else that needed it, we made it a competition of elite volunteers, and we actually gave them wording for their resume on the fact that they were an elite fundraiser for our agency. So again, you can level that across the board, and with your professionals, you can do that as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Sabrina. So at this point, we want to open it up to any questions in regards to this first section, talking about shifting to a virtual model and the peer ask model. And you can certainly either enter your question into the chat box or feel free to raise your hand and we can unmute your line.
No questions at this time.
Okay, then I think we'll just continue on. Thanks. All right, so now we want to talk a little bit about donor relations, which is certainly a very important part of any fundraising strategy. Because despite all the planning we do for our fundraisers, we want to make sure we don't forget our donors, and that includes all of our donors, both big and small. It's true, and we're seeing it right here in the Capital Region. We've already mentioned it. Many donors, are dedicating time, funding, and energy toward responding to the pandemic. However, this does not mean that they aren't interested in funding your cause. It does mean that you need to tell them. Communication is key. Funders will not know your needs unless you tell them. Think about the saying, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. Right now, COVID-19 is the squeakiest wheel. So the rest of us really need to speak up. Think about your messaging as you're thinking about talking to your donors. How does the current landscape impact your mission? How are your services tied toward COVID-19 response? And when we say this, I don't necessarily mean you need to be a health services organization serving people, serving people's health needs in relation to COVID-19. Instead, perhaps your programming is more in demand now because schools are closed and you work with children, or people have lost their employment and you're a food pantry. Maybe there is less demand for your services due to social distancing, and you've had to put time and money into reimagining your approach in order to offer the same great services and still help people who need your support. This is also a great time to show our appreciation to our donors. You don't always have to make it an ask, but reaching out to your donors, seeing how they're doing, just checking in and informing them on what you're doing as an organization is a great way to maintain your donors and volunteers, both big and small. So of course, there are many ways we can do this. Handwritten thank you notes and phone calls, text and email updates are all pretty standard. But you might also want to use some of the new tools that we're all using a lot more in order to acknowledge your donors in a different way. Consider a video acknowledgement. You can feature, very safely, you can feature clients from the safety of their own home. You can feature your staff and let your donors know you appreciate them, you appreciate their ongoing support. You can email them this video acknowledgement, you can post it online, give them a little bit of extra attention online by tagging them, and it also helps to demonstrate to other potential funders that people are still supporting your mission. This is also a great time to do a thank you event and just turn it into a virtual thank you event. You could do it for almost free of charge. Certainly you might want to give a token of thanks, but otherwise you can do a meeting or a dinner, quote unquote dinner event online. Thank your donors, remind them of what you're doing, and maybe even include an ask. We've got another great example that Sabrina's going to share of ways that you can stay in touch with your donors in a more organized fashion. And so I'm going to turn it over to Sabrina once again to share a really great tool.
Thanks again, Katie. So of course, I have this in an Excel document because I'm a nerd. It certainly does not need to be an Excel document. We will share this resource with you. And I think the main points for you to remember is the objective, and how you do it is totally up to you. You can customize this however you want. This is not something that I created. This is actually something that was created by a professional fundraiser, and it was called the Appreciation Grid. So it's something that I instituted in our organization, again, probably 4 or 5 years ago. And you can certainly learn from my mistakes. But what we were noticing in our agency is that we were doing a lot of running to stand still with our donors. So we would bring in a donor, get that person, into our mission, and then the next year go back and start that whole process again with new donors, but we were losing our old donors. And our retention rates of donors we saw extremely small, especially with lower end donors. So what we did was we created a benchmark of who hits the appreciation grid. So I took on a certain level up, and then I had some fund development people that took on more of the middle, and I had an event person that took on lower level donors. So the levels might have been very different. Our spreadsheets and Excel documents might have looked different, but the connection to the mission was the same, and the contact is what's actually vital and important here. Remember that your donors want to know how their money is being used and want to relate it directly to you, the mission, and the vision of the agency. So in the very first week, as soon as the donation was made, they got a welcome packet from our agency. If they were a brand new donor, it was kind of a welcome to the family letter directly from me. If it was a reoccurring donor, it was thank you for your continuation of your support, and here's how we're using that this year. With it, it came just a little bit of verbiage about our statistics and what we were doing within that year. Soon after, they got a thank you receipt for their taxes. And then soon after that, either I or a fund development person would do a little bit of research on that donor and figure out who they are, what their interests are, and why they chose to give to us. In the second month, there was a surprise and delight. So a very small swag gift, anything with your logo on it. What we chose to do was there was a local candy shop nearby. And we would just put our sticker, our logo sticker on the package, and I would write a cute little note just saying, you know, thanks for being so sweet to us. In the third month, depending again on their level, we would do a coffee or lunch with myself, and I would bring along a board member. This was not an ask. This was an opportunity to get to know the donor more, have them get to know the leadership of the agency. And again, this was highly variable depending on their level. Then we would do a handwritten thank you letter from a member of our board. Then again, a surprise and delight. So we would send an impactful story. We served kids. We would send an impactful story and a child that they specifically helped to support and a picture of that child. All of that came with media release, and we would only share first names. So please be very cognizant of that. But do not be afraid to share your stories and exactly who you're impacting. So if you're an environmental agency, show where that money is going. If you're an agency that services animals, this is going to sound silly. Send a thank you note from an animal that they are supporting. Put a paw print of an animal on there. Take a picture of your aquarium or whatever the case may be. But they want to see who they're supporting, not just the leadership and the staff. Month 6 was demonstrate impact. So we would share our progress and our program impact. We actually did evaluation studies on the children that we served. But whatever that program impact means for you, shoot them a quick email and let them know how your year is going. If something didn't work, let them know that too. We tried this, it didn't work, and here's how we're pivoting. Because they want to know that you're thinking about this as a business decision. In month 7, we would do an award event, and we would highlight 2 donors. We would highlight a corporate champion, and we would highlight a community supporter. If you have to pivot to this being virtually, you can certainly do that. And month 8, again, was a surprise or delight. They would either get free tickets to an event that we had upcoming, or they would get a handwritten thank you note from somebody that they were servicing. So for us, it was the children. Our children would write thank you notes. Month 9, we would do a coffee and lunch date just with me. Again, this was solely focused on the donor, how their year was going, a catch up with them. And then, you know, whenever the conversation did pivot back to the agency, we'll make sure that, you know, I would update them on what we were doing with the year. Month 10, we did an appreciation plaque. And the way that we did it was we would highlight the picture of the child that they supported, and then underneath would be the year that they gave, and then a whole bunch of empty plaques. And it worked. I would have donors that would call me that say, I had my 17 plaque, what do I need to do to get to 18? I don't know what it is about that, but it worked. And I had donors specifically calling, asking for their 18 plaque and what they needed to do. In month 11 and month 12, again, we did a surprise and delight and a demonstrate impact. So this can be a holiday card, it can be a Valentine's Day card. And then finally, we would wrap up with our annual report, which listed all of our donors in there. And I would send that to them and highlight their name in it and do, again, just a quick little thank you note on top. We will send this to you. You can customize it however you want. And I can even show you how I did it in Excel so that I kept track of people month to month.
Sabrina, we had a question from
Sure.
Sarah. And she asked, do you use the appreciation grid past the first year?
Yeah, that is a great question. So I did. I used it for 4 years in a row. On year 4 is when I realized I needed to change my what it is, so that it didn't look the same each and every time. There are certain things I definitely kept the same. I kept the appreciation plaque because they wanted that year. I always kept a letter from one of our kids. And I always kept a picture and a story of who they supported, and everything else I kind of shifted a little bit so that it didn't look like same old, same old.
Absolutely. And this is in an Excel format that we are going to share with you. So you can certainly change this to fit your own vision of how to do this appreciation grid, but this is a really great example. Any other questions, Liz?
I don't see any, Katie.
Okay. Well, then we'll move on to our last section. Finally, we want to walk you through a few additional thoughts and recommendations as you move forward into this new reality. So first and foremost, form a fundraising strategy committee. Certainly, some of us already have one, but if you don't already have one, now's the time to form a committee. Even if you do have a fundraising committee or a development committee, maybe creating a separate committee that's specific to right now. Using that word strategy might encourage some new ideas, help to expand your potential reach of new contacts and social networks, and increase your personal and professional bandwidth. And you want to use your board and volunteers. They might be the people you staff your committee with, or you might just challenge them. Sabrina had a great example of the peer ask model, where we developed a give and get contest. Or you might just challenge them to bring in new relationships. How many people can come back to our next board meeting with 5 new relationships that might benefit the organization? Board members and volunteers can also help you maintain your current relationships. Those thank you notes and phone calls we mentioned previously, they can certainly help, especially if you have a large donor list. You'll also want to reevaluate your fundraising needs and expectations. And we recommend that you use these 3 important tools: end of year projections, profit and loss statements, and cash flow, to help you understand your financial situation, particularly as it may shift throughout the course of the year. So you'll want to update your organizational budget and project your future needs through the end of your budget year. And then continue to revisit that on a monthly basis to keep track of the changes. How much do you need to raise and how has it changed? In some cases, you may need more funds because you've lost some donations or you've had an increase in expenses. And in some cases, you may need less to get you through the end of the year, specifically because of how times have changed. You'll also want to update your event budget. With a shift in your event, you're likely to have a shift in expenses. So how has your event budget increased or decreased? Does that make your event more profitable? Does it change how many people you need to target to participate? And then, of course, consider realistic expectations for giving from your donors. Don't forget to invest some time in your marketing and communication strategy. This will help you share your mission and purpose with a larger community and keep your mission top of mind for your existing community. And we encourage you to use the resources that exist already. Chambers of Commerce are a great resource, and they tend to do a lot of promotion for their member organizations. You can tap into their website, newsletter, and other activities like radio spots to get the word out. You can also reach out to local radio stations yourself and schedule an interview to help you reach a larger and more diverse audience. You'll also want to consider a newsletter. And here I recommend not only making sure you have your own newsletter, but also trying to tap into that of partner organizations. Maybe you can feature a partner in your newsletter and they can do so in kind for you, and it can help you both reach a larger audience. Local podcasts, blogs, and influencers are another great opportunity if you can get them to feature you. You can reach a new audience. And so here we've featured Friday Flavor, which is a new podcast that has been developed recently specifically to feature nonprofits and businesses who are working in the COVID-19 world and how they're shifting and how they're reimagining their services. And I know Sabrina's sharing the contact information so that you can get in contact with that resource. And finally, there's always social media. We pretty much all have social media accounts for our organizations, and it's a great way to reach your existing audience and to expand. Finally, you're going to want to consider updating your messaging, and we talked a little bit about it before. But first, you need to know who you're talking to. Consider your funders. What draws them to your purpose? What is their socioeconomic status? That's going to help you determine how much you're going to ask for, which events you're going to invite them to. And what is their capacity to give, and how might that have changed? If you know that some of your donors may be impacted by job loss or furloughing, you might want to change the way that you're asking and how much you're asking for. So how can you reframe your message in light of the pandemic? Get creative with how you frame your ask. Partnering with financial advisors can also help you tap into a list of donors you might not be aware of. And if you don't have a financial partner, we can certainly help connect you. So at this point, we have one final example, and I'm actually going to ask Liz to join us. Give us an example on reframing our messaging.
Thanks, Katie. So I just wanted to give you some examples of some organizations and how they have reframed their messaging in light of the current COVID-19 crisis or pandemic that we're in right now. And these all, I think, are really good examples of using a lot of the things that Katie and Sabrina have highlighted up till now. For example, this first one up at the top is obviously an organization that works with animals, right? You have the pictures of the two dogs there, and this helps potential donors and current donors focus on who and what their support, who their money is going to support. And that, as Sabrina said, share your stories and let people know what their support is helping, who they're actually impacting. Again, they don't always want to see the staff and executive leadership. That's important, but it's really important for them to know where their money is going and who they are supporting. So right here, you've got the pictures of those dogs there. And this message also reframes and highlights, you'll see it says, your gift helps so much in this uncertain time. So that references the current situation that we're all in, and that also helps this message resonate. This middle one is from Big Brothers Big Sisters, and in normal times or prior to this pandemic, their messaging was really focused around helping kids reach their full potential. And you can see that they've reframed it to focus on what they're doing right now during this time. What are they doing, and what are they doing to help kids now? It says we're stepping up to keep kids connected and supported during this time of social distancing, school closures, and stress related to the coronavirus crisis. So they are not frontline providers. They're not providing medical services or food, protective equipment, testing, or any of those things. But they are reminding people and letting people know that what they are doing is important and it is relevant in this time of coronavirus. And that's what you need to keep that in mind for your agency as well. We know that what you're doing is important. It's vital, even during this time. And it's your purview, and it is your charge to make sure that people know that. It's your responsibility in your messaging to let people realize that. And that goes back to what Katie was talking about on how does the current landscape impact your mission, right? That's really important to keep in mind. And also, what draws people to your mission? What drew them before this current landscape, or this current crisis, is the same thing that will draw them to your mission now. So although people have shifted a lot of the focus and attention is directly to COVID-19 and how we can respond to that, the thing that drew people to your mission prior to this is the thing that will still draw them to it. The last example is from the Monterey Bay Aquarium. And this references what Katie mentioned before. Funders will not know what you need unless you tell them. So this is really clear from this example from the aquarium they're making a direct ask and telling people why we need your help. So they're still committed to animal care, and we need your support. The reason is that normally, under normal times, the aquarium has visitors that come in and pay a ticket price to go in and see all the displays at the aquarium. And that's what supports their mission and supports the care of the animals and all the sea life at the aquarium. Well, they can't do that now. They can't have people, obviously the aquarium's closed, so they don't have ticket buyers. So they're being very clear about that. Their staff is still taking care of animals and maintain all the stuff that needs to be maintained at the aquarium. All that work is still there, but they're without that ticket revenue. So they're just being very clear about what their needs are, very straightforward. So these are some of the things that you should be thinking about when you are reframing your message. You still want to make sure that people know you're here, you're still doing your work, and it may be different now, your work may look different now, but you're still here and you're still a vital part of the community, and your mission is still as relevant as ever. So these are just some good examples here, I think, that hit that mark, and that I hope that you'll be able to use as you think about how you are going to send your messaging out into the community.
Great, thank you, Liz.
Okay.
So now we'll move on. We'll open it up to any questions.
We did have a question earlier from Kathy. She asked, on average, how do the donation results of virtual events differ from traditional?
Oh, that's a great question. And my initial reaction is that it's highly variable. I think it depends on the type of event, the amount, ticket amount or participation amount that you're asking, and how many people you typically have participating. I'm sure there are statistics out there, and I'm very happy to look into that. But I think the answer is highly variable at this point, whether or not you can expect more participation, especially if you lower your ask, or if participation is going down. Obviously, we saw previously that fundraising overall is down.
I do think we're still in the early phases of it, so I think time will tell, but we're certainly recommending to people that there's two things I'm definitely seeing. One, those that have come to your events before want to support you. So tell them how you're pivoting, tell them what you're doing, and they'll come. So you might have to drop a ticket price, but they'll come. One thing I wouldn't do is I wouldn't anticipate, if you went into this year with trying to up your event by, let's say, 20%, that might happen unless you have extremely dynamic honorary chairs that are going to pull in a network and really support you. So you might want to reduce your budget to that. However, you're also reducing your budget in the sense that you're not paying for a venue. You might still have to pay for a meal. You might want to drop something off to somebody. You might still have to pay for drop-off costs. If you were having a band, we would recommend still keeping that vibe going. And then the third thing I'm noticing is people want to do something at night. And I know Liz kind of touched on this a little bit too, but at concerts right now are going gangbusters. So if somebody's promoting a live concert and doing a donation through it, it's great. If you had a band and they're willing to still do something, great. Have them still do it, have the music playing. Have people come, have them get dressed up. They still want to do this sort of stuff. So it might be a wash, but we are recommending that people kind of lower their budget a little bit in terms of anticipation of trying to increase what they were from years past. But those that came are going to want to come again.
Yeah. I'll just add one thing. I echo what Sabrina has said, but just anecdotally in the groups, some executive director groups that I'm in, people have reported that, for example, if they've switched their gala to a virtual gala this year, the donations might be down like 10% or so, but people are actually pleasantly surprised, I guess is the way to frame it. That, again, as Sabrina said, if people have supported you before and they would come to your live gala or your live event, they still want to support you, and for the most part, they will.
Absolutely. And if your giving is down by 10% but you're also able to reduce some of your expenses, you may still end up with the funding that you need. So certainly, as we mentioned before, making sure to look at all of the pieces is very important.
And Katie, we do have a question that came in about software platforms, specifically for online auction. Do we have any
We do. So a couple
options for that?
aware of, and I'm sure that there are many. One Cause is a great tool. GiveSmart also has a nice tool, as well as Greater Giving. So those are three that I'm aware of. I know that I'm sure if I did a Google search, we could find a few more. So that last one, yep, Greater Giving, perfect. Any other questions?
Let's see. I don't see any immediately.
Okay. All right. So we do have a few resources that we'll be sharing after today's webinar. We'll send out an email. We'll include the recording, and it will actually be a link to the recording, so you can share that with anyone who may have missed today's webinar or who you think could benefit. We'll be sharing the Peer Ask chart that was featured previously, as well as the donor appreciation grid. We also have a virtual fundraising checklist that will help you remember some of the tips and tricks that we've offered today if you are considering shifting to a virtual model. And finally, we want to remind you of Capital CFO's nonprofit services, and we do have many: strategic planning, board development, interim executive director and transition planning, training and workshops like the one provided today, grant writing, and outreach and communication. Before we close today, we do have a couple more minutes. We're very interested to hear from the audience. We're obviously all at different places in our fundraising strategy, but we're very interested to hear what you have done to shift your fundraising strategy. So if you're interested in sharing, we'd love for you to raise your hand. We can unmute the line. Or of course, you can also share anything you have to share in the chat box as well. So we'll just give a moment to see if anyone has anything to share.
Katie, while people are maybe thinking or typing, I do want to share that I know that there's a nonprofit that's gone to a virtual bowling event instead of doing their major event as their bowl. So that's been somewhat successful for them too.
Okay, recommendations for a virtual golf tournament. Ours is currently scheduled for July 31st. No idea if this is going to take place.
There is actually a recommendation. I know of a nonprofit that did do a virtual golf event, and there's places that golfing is still happening right now. So there's ways that you can definitely do that. And you can have it done within social distance. So you wouldn't be able to do it, all in one spot, all at the same time. But you can definitely do it. You might have to prolong it a little bit. So instead of one day, you might have to make it over the course of several days and work with a couple of different venues. But you can definitely still do a golf event. Absolutely. It's one of the things that actually didn't close down.
Yeah, I also kind of model that virtual run concept of, have people go and golf on their own, but they're doing it in honor of your organization. They post about it. They still, provide a contribution, but then they just go and golf.
And you can still do it in foursomes. If you go with a group of 4, you can still do it in foursomes, and it's touchless from what I've heard. So golf is still very popular right now.
Absolutely. And I also see in the chat box, Jocelyn shared, we are doing a mass distribution of food at the Albany Airport on June 11th in place of their golf classic. That's a really interesting shift. Anything else? I don't see anyone raising their hands. Anything else anyone would like to share? Okay. Well, we certainly want to thank you all for joining us today. Here's our contact information. If you have any questions or interested in having some further conversation about shifting your fundraising strategy, we are here to support you. And of course, there are those additional services that Capital CFO offers to nonprofits. We'd also like to kind of inform you, and we'll include this in our follow-up email. We do have another webinar coming up on June 9th. It is 10:30 a.m. and we'll be talking about strategic planning and organizational assessment. I'll figure out how to say that word. And we'd love to have you then. So we'll be sending you some information on how you can join us. All right. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.